So here I am, studying, doing some homework on my first week back from winter break, listening to some assorted jazz when this indescribable, angelic sound blesses my ears. I take a peek, and I've never heard of them before. Let me preface this. I am a surface-level jazz enjoyer. I don't typically do deep dives. I stick to my Dave Brubeck, my Miles Davis, my Piero Piccioni, and other assorted one-off jazz songs that I like. But here I am, listening to the Spotify curated playlist, which, to be honest, I don't really look for when I'm discovering new music, when this symphony of fingers gliding across these neo-soul organ keys paired with the smooth sliding of fingers across the fretboard and quiet, but not understated drums, it shocks me to my core. How have I never heard of this band, or this album, or this man? The band is the Dalak Band. The album, Wede Harer Guzo. And the man is Hailu Mergia. Boasting a paltry 240,000 listeners, he's on the lesser-known side of jazz, soul, and funk. Compared to common names like Miles Davis or Dave Brubeck, whom boast 3 million and 2 million monthly listeners respectively, Mergia is pretty small. So who is Mergia, and what is this album, Wede Harer Guzo? Funny enough, Hailu Mergia is actually a cab driver. At least nowadays, anyhow. But back in the 70s and the 80s, Mergia would play with the Walias Band at the Hilton, and the Dalak Band at the Giyan Hotel in Addis Ababa. Mergia was somewhat of an Ethiopian star, and one boasting some punkish tendencies, as you'll come to see. Mergia flourished during a dark time for Ethiopia. A militant group known as the Derg had overthrown the Ethiopian government and the associated emperor, Haile Selassie, during a protest, and renamed itself the PMAC, Provisional Military Administrative Council. After about 6 months, the Derg, or PMAC, had established itself in Ethiopia by proxy as a Marxist-Leninist state. A man named Mengistu Haile Mariam launched a campaign known as the Red Terror. This was meant to repress political opponents, and it lost anywhere from 10,000 to 980,000 lives to execution and imprisonment. And I realize that is a pretty large discrepancy. You might be saying to yourself, oh my god, this sounds horrible. Does Mergia come to save the day? Well, not exactly. You see, Mergia is an expert accordionist and keyboardist, and he's not a crime-fighting, warlord-whooping, regime-tackling one at that. You see, the Derg had imposed a curfew when they put their regime in place, to last from midnight to 6 a.m. And Mergia and the Walias Band solution was to play music all night long throughout that curfew, to keep people off the streets and out of harm's way. Hailu's focus on jazz fusion was, simply put, to avoid censorship. In his own words, when you sing or write lyrics, you have to support the government, and if you don't do that, then you have a problem. Hence why his music is largely non-verbal and mostly instrumental at this time. Instruments don't have to sing the praise of an oppressive regime that you are not a fan of. Under the Derg, any music not singing their praises was prohibited, and as a result, music shops closed and bands stopped touring. But not Mergia. The Walias Band, and Mergia by extension, were one of the only touring musicians left after the Derg had cracked down on music. And they were only spared because of their non-lyrical loopholes and gaining favor with the Derg, as well as other political beings during their time at the upscale Hilton Hotel. With the Derg's crackdown, all musical production stopped. Music made its way around via copies of master cassette tapes that the closed music shops made by night in order to stay out of the Derg's line of sight. This album, Wede Harer Guzo, was one of these. Wede Harer Guzo was a cassette-only recording made by Mergia during his time with the Dalak Band in 1977. It's a slight difference from the more refined Walias Band, whom appealed to a greater audience and one with finer taste, whereas the Dalak Band appealed to a younger crowd, and they were making these soul, jazz, R&B, Amharic jams that Mergia was looking for at the time. To escape censorship, Mergia and the Dalak Band played their vocal lines with instruments as a replacement. Mergia's arrangements of the vocal melodies, along with his soulful chops on his organ and his keyboard, were very popular with listeners, and were no doubt the key to the success of his tapes in both Ethiopia and the Western world. They were so successful, in fact, that they started a US tour, where he and some of his bandmates had decided to defect from the Derg. The band split up, as some had chosen not to defect from the murderous regime, likely hoping to keep their livelihoods intact. And such was the end of Hailu Mergia's touring days, but not the end of his musical days. He recorded a cassette called Hailu Mergia in his classical instrument, which comes into play later. But after that, he hung up his musical playing talent for a while. But not forever. Years later, after opening an unsuccessful restaurant and driving a cab around for a number of years, his cassettes were discovered in Ethiopia in 2013 by a man known as Brian Shimkovitz, founder of a label known as Awesome Tapes from Africa, who tracked Hailu down and asked if he could release his music again, which thereby convinced the man, the myth, and the legend, Mergia, to take his metaphorical musical jersey out of the rafters and start riffing those soulful keyboard licks once more. Listening to Wede Harer Guzo, it's a shame for so many years that it had fallen by the wayside, but Mergia himself says at age 70-something that even he's surprised. He still draws in a young crowd just like he did back then in the 70s, even though the audience is largely Westerners now. Mergia's story is one of trial, hardship, perseverance, and rebellion. Frankly, at least on Wede Harer Guzo, you would never be able to tell by these funky, tropical, uplifting melodies that persist from track to track. The hum of this discordant organ mixed with the softer keyboard sounds and quiet guitar and bass tracks is almost something new to me. And truth be told, I haven't explored music much outside of my own culture, but if anything, this hidden gem alone has convinced me to do so. If you find yourselves at all interested, please do yourselves a favor and listen to this album and more of this artist. Surely, the music compels me in a way I didn't think possible. I didn't see myself coming back from school, writing a YouTube video on an Ethiopian jazz record that was recorded in 1977 but wasn't released until 2016. I feel as though I've relearned what it's like to hear something truly new to me, even if it was recorded nearly 50 years ago. It's really a wonderful record. If you like what you hear here, feel free to like and subscribe below and leave a comment on what you think of the album. But most of all, check out Hailu Mergia on Spotify. Please give him the listens he deserves. That's all, thank you, and hopefully I see you here again soon.